UAE's Energy Minister has told Reuters news agency that it's a decision taken after a careful look at the strategies related to energy field and petroleum sector and others. UAE's Energy Minister has said UAE has been a member of OPEC and OPEC Plus for a long time and that they see the future, that the world will demand and need more energy. UAE has left OPEC and OPEC Plus, or rather will leave as of the 1st of May. UAE's Energy Minister saying that UAE is doing this at the right time without hugely impacting the market because of constraints on the Strait of Hormuz. UAE's Energy Minister has said the decision will enable the UAE to work with its partners and investors to ensure that they are able to supply future requirements of world when it comes to crude oil and petrochemicals as well as gas. The big news breaking at this hour, UAE has announced that it will leave the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC and OPEC Plus. Amidst the war in West Asia, we have my colleague Karthik Malhotra now joining us from the newsroom. Karthik, a massive decision, a once-in-a-lifetime decision. The OPEC was formed for this particular reason, to ensure and boost crude oil supply and keep it steady. And looks like now UAE is saying to do that, we need to leave OPEC.
Krishna, and I think it comes at a crucial time because remember, OPEC has been around for 6 decades. In fact, 1967 is when OPEC was formed, and then of course you had OPEC Plus. So the original 12 founding members of OPEC are now -1, with UAE deciding to exit. Now, reasons, even though the Reuters story that you mentioned happens to be, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz as one of the stated reasons, but I think there has been a sort of conflict simmering, a soft conflict, if I can call it, between Saudi Arabia and UAE for many years now. Now remember, Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of oil in the Gulf nations, and UAE is actually number 3rd. So after Saudi Arabia, you've got Iraq and then UAE. But I think this entire cartelization, which is what Donald Trump has called it, is something which is now leading to an expedited decision by UAE to go ahead and get out of OPEC as well as OPEC Plus, simply because it seems that the Brent crude oil price, which is hovering in the range of about $106 to $110 a barrel for the last 2 or 3 days now, is something which is sort of reducing the supply of oil from UAE. And UAE, given the fact that it is part of OPEC, it is aligned in that OPEC bloc and is dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, is finding it difficult to sort of sell enough oil and also, for that matter, process enough oil at these elevated oil prices. So I think it's a multiple sort of factors coming together. One, of course, has been this rivalry with Saudi Arabia, which has been the big daddy of this oil producing region. And in addition to that, of course, this sudden pressure with spiking oil prices really making UAE's market position as far as its oil and the ability to sell this oil even more complex. So the question really is, what happens now? Because we already have a Brent oil price, which is largely a combination of the prices between the OPEC and OPEC Plus, depending on the supply and the demand. And then, of course, you've got the more sour variety of crude, which represents the American basket called the WTI. Are we now looking at a third sort of benchmark to appear on our dashboard soon, which is going to be UAE oil? And what is that really going to be pegged to is the big question, which doesn't have an answer immediately, Krishna.
But Karthik, the first question that's going to arise on everybody who's watching this broadcast, watching this news breaking, is that how much will this add to the instability that already exists? OPEC Plus losing a member like the UAE, the more the merrier, isn't it, when it comes to the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, a key member who's also a supplier to India, incidentally, now not being part of OPEC. Right now, all global alliances are under question. NATO, from NATO onwards to, United Nations. This is going to be another existential crisis for OPEC.
No doubt about it. I think multiple questions there, Krishna. Let's try and take them one by one. What it means for the overall supply of oil? Well, I think oil will continue to be supplied by UAE, whether or not it is part of OPEC, because its economy, apart from tourism, apart from financial institutions, still rides on this oil wave. So the fact of the matter is that UAE will continue to produce oil. If I read the situation correctly, and it could be a wrong reading, but if I read the situation correctly, it means that UAE will be able to produce oil to its fullest capacity and not really be dominated by Saudi Arabia or by pressure from the OPEC bloc to keep to keep the supply short of expectations, given the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz and given the overall transportation issues. So I believe that UAE will now be in a position to, in fact, extend its overall oil production, increase its oil production, and that should hopefully add more supply in the overall oil market. Now, coming to India specifically, the fact that UAE decides to step out of OPEC does not really mean that India and UAE will not be in a position to trade with each other. I mean, despite the sanctions on Russia, India has continued to buy Russian oil, right? So I think while you will continue to buy oil from OPEC or OPEC Plus, depending on the supply side issues being resolved, I think UAE becomes another formidable player to continue supplying oil to India. Now, the question really is how, because of course you've got ADNOC, which is the Abu Dhabi National Oil Corporation, which actually is one of the biggest suppliers to India. So on an average, if ADNOC has got the capacity to produce about 5 million barrels of oil, but UAE as a market is right now, given the pressure in the Strait of Hormuz, supplying just 3 million barrels of oil, then there is a sort of deficit of 2 million, which will continue to flow out. And then of course from Abu Dhabi, if oil were to come to India, then I think the complications of the Strait of Hormuz, while they're still there, at least operationally get ironed out a little bit, given the fact that Abu Dhabi is on the eastern coast of Dubai, of UAE.
Okay, fair enough. We will leave it at that for now. Karthik, all I can say is that hope floats, and so does OPEC. We'll have to wait and watch as to how things unfold in the coming days. But thank you so much for joining us with that update. Karthik Malhotra there, joining us with that big breaking story.